You're looking at video of the escalating conflict between Israel and the terrorist group Hamas in Gaza. Welcome to Opinion Journal Live. I'm Mary Kissel. Joining me now to discuss the contours of this conflict is Global View columnist Bret Stephens. Bret, welcome to the show. Bret, you've talked with Prime Minister Netanyahu regularly over the years. What do those conversations, how do those conversations inform your view of what's going on right now?
Well, you know, it's interesting, Mary. Just about 4 years ago, in January 2009, I interviewed Mr. Netanyahu. He was on the eve of returning to office on the day that the ceasefire, the last ceasefire, was announced between Israel and Hamas over their conflict in the Gaza Strip at the very beginning of 2009. And I said to him, you know, are you satisfied with this ceasefire? And he was unequivocal. He said, look, any deal that leaves Hamas in power, that allows them to continue to supply themselves through their border with Egypt with more munitions, more rockets, is just going to lead to a repetition of the same thing. And in fact, those words were prophetic. What's interesting also, however, is he also seems to be going for a ceasefire rather than some different kind of arrangement which ends Hamas rule in the Strip.
Okay, let's talk about that. What role does this changed environment that Israel now sits in the middle of? For example, I note that Egypt sent the chief of the Muslim Brotherhood to the Gaza Strip this morning to show his support. What role does that changed environment play in how Mr. Netanyahu is responding to the situation today? Well,
the way it should affect the Israelis is they need to understand they have less room for maneuver than they had before. You know, previously in 2008 and 9, when the Mubarak government seemed firmly entrenched in Egypt, they could have a situation in which Gaza was this Hamas enclave, Hamas entrepot, because both the Egyptian government and the Israeli government were firmly opposed to Hamas. That's no longer the case. Right now in Sinai, the Egyptians used to have some control over what was going on in Sinai. There's less and less control. There's more terrorist activity coming across the border into Israel. So that should be telling the Israeli government they cannot afford to have Gaza remaining under Hamas's rule. What I think the Israeli government is trying to do is very carefully calibrate its position towards the Morsi government, the Muslim Brotherhood government in Egypt, for fear of a definitive break between Israel and Egypt, which I fear is coming one way or another.
So does this mean that we are or are not looking at some sort of ground war erupting here soon?
That's very hard to say, you know, and I think you could, look, there are feverish efforts to achieve a ceasefire. I think President Morsi in Egypt wants to show that he's the guy who holds the leash on Hamas. He's working towards a ceasefire. The Qataris are, the Turks are. I think the Obama administration wants a ceasefire. On the other hand, the rocket fire from Hamas is not letting up, and the Israelis have talked about a sort of a 36-hour window for this to end. If that doesn't end, they will be hard pressed not to go in with ground forces. That being said, a ground invasion of Gaza doesn't mean going into cities. It can be done strategically and relatively bloodlessly.
We've got about a minute left, Bret. Let's look at what President Obama said. His first comments on the situation came yesterday, and I quote, "There's no country on earth that would tolerate missiles raining down on its citizens from outside its borders. We are fully supportive of Israel's right to defend itself." How far does that support go,
That's
Bret?
a great statement. I think the president deserves credit for making that statement. It's absolutely right. The problem is that on the one hand, you say Israel has the right to defend itself. On the other hand, the Americans, along with the Europeans, are cautioning Israel about taking another step. They're urging a ceasefire, and so they're saying Israel has the right to defend itself, but you know, only up to a point. And I think what the Obama administration really ought to be saying is not only does Israel have a right to defend itself, but Israel will not have peace so long as this terrorist group Hamas remains in power in the Gaza Strip.
Okay, we're going to leave it at that. Global View columnist Bret Stephens, some very unique insights there. Thank you so much for joining us.